Apple just announced their new M1 Pro and M1 Max chips, along with the new MacBook Pro 14-inch and 16-inch models. To everyone's surprise, not only did the performance exceed everyone's expectations, but also the fact that everyone got what they wanted in a MacBook Pro. For example, everyone didn't like the touch bar. Now, I personally had no issue with the touch bar, but majority of the people, they didn't like it. So Apple took it out. They took care of that. Now, with the ports, they added all the ports that everyone wanted. You got the SD card slot back, you got a bunch of Thunderbolt 4 ports, you've got an HDMI port, and you have an audio jack which supports high impedance headphones. So if you're a pro that's going to be using wired headphones, high quality ones, you're good to go. They added ProMotion to the display, which is awesome. They gave us amazing battery life and amazing performance. Now, I don't think that this was all done by accident. In fact, I believe that Apple is making a really smart business move, and let me explain why. You see, let's take the iPhone as an example. The 13 Pro and Pro Max models just got ProMotion. When so many different phones and so many different devices have had this capability for many, many years. But we only get things on Apple devices when Apple sees fit. And that's usually for good reason. It's when they can implement it the right way. But with the MacBooks, it's a different story because Apple realizes that the M1 Pro and the M1 Max chips are a game changer. So in order to capitalize on the market share and grab all the pro users that they possibly can, they have given everybody what they wanted. Think about it, they have an edge on their competition. Nobody is offering the kind of claims that Apple just made at their event. Nobody is offering you the ability to have this kind of performance in any other laptop that is out on the market right now. So by Apple offering you that bleeding edge performance, and at the same time they're able to give you all the things that you wanted, all the things that you've been longing for, they're now going to be able to capitalize on all the pro users that maybe weren't even thinking about a MacBook, but now they're definitely going to be on board. Now, I personally have been waiting for this moment for a very long time. I sold my 16-inch MacBook Pro when the M1 chips were announced. I went out, got the M1 Mac Mini, and I've had a great experience with it. I've done reviews both short-term and long-term with the M1 Mac Mini, and it's been absolutely great. But I have missed having a MacBook, having that portability to just edit footage from a living room sofa, to edit from any kind of coffee shop. I've really missed having a MacBook, but the reason I didn't buy an M1 MacBook was because I knew that there was going to be a successor to the M1 chip. And I wanted to have a laptop that was way, way more capable. See, my 16-inch MacBook Pro, I had decked out with specs. I basically future-proofed it so that it would be good for me for a good amount of years. And now with the MacBook Pro, with the M1 Max chip, having a 16-inch MacBook that is this capable, that has such good battery life, I know for a fact that I'm going to be really, really good to go for a lot of years to come. So now that I've shared my thoughts as to why I believe Apple did what they did and what I'm excited for, let's talk about a few notable changes with these new MacBooks and these new chips. So right off the bat, one of the things I loved right away was the fact that whether you buy the 14-inch or the 16-inch, you're just choosing a screen size that's going to be suitable and a battery size that's going to be suitable for you. For example, everything else, you can spec it out to be the same. You could get the M1 Max with the full spec load on the 14-inch and the 16-inch alike. I personally like this because I saw this with the 13 Pro and Pro Max. They're both the same phone, but it's just going to come down to which size screen that you want and what kind of battery life you want. Now, though this is great that you could spec out the 14-inch and 16-inch to be the exact same computer, you do have to keep in mind that thermal efficiency is going to come into play here. For example, those maxed out internals in a 14-inch body, they only have so much room for heat to dissipate and cool off. You're going to have more room to work with a 16-inch body. So if you're somebody that's going to be putting a continuous workload on the 14-inch model, you want to keep that in mind and maybe go for the 16-inch so that you have a bigger chassis to play with. Now next I wanted to talk about the base model M1 chip from last year and the base model M1 Pro chip that you're going to find in the 14-inch, because it does differ. In the 14-inch, you're getting the 8-core M1 Pro chip, and then in the 16-inch, you're going to get the 10-core M1 Pro chip. Now right away, when you look at the M1 chip from last year, you see an 8-core CPU, and then you look at the M1 Pro in the 14-inch and you see a 8-core CPU, and you might be wondering, well, what is the difference here? Well, the difference comes out to how these cores are split up. So in the M1, you have an 8-core CPU, but 4 of those cores are performance cores, and then 4 of them are efficiency cores. Now with the M1 Pro in the 14-inch, you've got an 8-core CPU, but 6 of those cores are performance cores, and 2 of those cores are efficiency cores. So if you're coming from a previous M1 configuration from last year, whether it was the M1 MacBook Pro or the M1 Mac Mini, you're getting 2 more performance cores right off the bat by going for the base model. That is in terms of performance. And take this with quotes because real world tests have yet to be done. But theoretically, that's the increase that you should be seeing. Now, in terms of the GPU, you're going from an 8-core GPU in any of the M1 configurations except for the iMac. The iMac had the 7-core GPU, but all the other M1 chips of last year had the 8-core GPU, and you're going from an 8-core to a 14-core in the base model configuration of the 14-inch MacBook Pro. And last but not least, you're also going from 8 gigabytes of RAM in the base model of any of the M1 configurations to a 16 gigabytes of RAM in the base model 14-inch MacBook Pro. So as I was taking a look at the base model 14-inch MacBook Pro, I mean, the amount of performance that you're getting is not bad here. And then you take into account the fact that you're getting more ports, more Thunderbolt 4 ports, you've got that audio jack, you've got the ProMotion in the display, and suddenly the 13-inch MacBook Pro from last year at $1,299 doesn't look so great for $700 more, especially if you're somebody that hasn't bought one yet. Now next, let's talk about the display of these new MacBooks. Now right off the bat, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking about that notch. To be very honest with you, when I first saw it, I thought that this would mean that we're getting some Face ID or something like that, but honestly, it doesn't really bother me. It's off at the top, and to me, it seems like it's part of the menu bar. So I don't really think that it's going to be showing up in things like Safari and whatnot. But I do know that when I first open the MacBook and I do take a look at it, it's going to take some getting used to. Just like for the first time when we saw it on iPhones. When we saw it on the iPhones, it was different. And it took a little bit for your eyes to get used to. But I think ultimately it's not going to be an issue. Now, one good thing that did happen with that notch is that the camera actually got improved. I don't know why Apple for so long had a 720p camera. I had the 16-inch MacBook and that had a 720p camera, and it was really sad. To be very honest, it was really sad to see that low quality of a camera for FaceTime calls on a MacBook, especially when you're paying $4,000 or $5,000 for it to be fully spec'd out. So seeing it go to a 1080p camera is really nice. And the last thing I do want to mention is that that notch, I think ultimately is going to result in Face ID. We didn't get Face ID just yet, but I think ultimately it's coming. Now, the notch might actually be annoying to look at for the first time, but what's not going to be annoying is the beautiful Retina XDR displays. Both the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros have a mini LED display. The 14-inch is actually a 14.2-inch, and the 16-inch is actually a 16.2-inch display. Now, both the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pro are going to have ProMotion in their displays. This is going to be great because when you do need a higher refresh rate, it's going to be able to scale up and give you a smooth and fluid experience. And when you don't need it, it's going to be able to scale down and save you on that battery life. Now, another nice thing about both the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pro is the Liquid Retina XDR display. These are HDR displays with 1000 nits sustained brightness with up to 1600 nits of peak brightness. I don't think outdoor visibility is going to be any kind of issue. And if you're anybody doing any kind of creative work, graphics work, video editing, the colors and everything is going to look so beautiful on these displays. Now next, let's move on to the design of both the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pro. It's very reminiscent of the 2007 MacBook, and I had one of those, so I'll throw up some images of it so you can take a look. It's very similar to that. Now, one notable thing is that they're pretty much same in comparison to like the 13-inch and the 16-inch, but one thing that has changed is the thickness of the base of the MacBooks. And that's because of the internal components. So you've got bigger batteries in both the 14-inch and 16-inch, and you need more space for the internals and the heat to dissipate. So I don't mind this. I don't mind them being a little bit thicker and heavier at the same time, if it means that we're going to be getting more performance, which we are. Another welcome change is the inclusion of Magsafe. I'm really happy to see this because I loved being able to use Magsafe. And it wasn't all about just charging through Magsafe, but it was just the fact that the cable magnetically attaching, so many times I walked past my cable and I accidentally nudged it with my foot. And instead of yanking the entire computer off the table, the cable just came off. And that was a really nice thing I loved about Magsafe. So I'm definitely happy to see it, but I'm even happier to see the fact that you don't have to rely on Magsafe to charge. If you want to use USB-C, you can do that with one of the Thunderbolt ports. Now, speaking of ports, you have the HDMI port, you have an SD card slot, you've got 3 Thunderbolt 4 ports, and then you've got an audio jack with support for high impedance headphones. Another change with the design is the keyboard itself. So now we don't have the touch bar at the top like we did before. I personally didn't mind having the touch bar, but since a lot of people don't like it, if a lot of people are going to be happy with the change, I'll be happy with the change. We do have physical keys in place of it, and we also have Touch ID. This is nice because we don't have Face ID to unlock and authenticate Apple Pay purchases, so it's definitely nice to have Touch ID there. The other thing that's changed is that the keyboard is entirely black now. I don't mind it. I didn't mind it before the way it was, so I'm happy with it either way. But these are a few changes that have happened with the keyboard itself. Alright, so those are the things that stood out to me with the MacBook Pro 14-inch and 16-inch. Now, I could sit here forever and talk about the different configurations of the M1 Pro or the M1 Max and whether you should get a 14-inch or 16-inch, but I'm not going to do that because we'd be here forever. But what I am going to say is that you need to analyze your workflow and see what's going to work best for you. For example, I'm already on an M1 Mac Mini, and that's the base model. So I know that I don't really have to go all out in terms of specs and get the kind of performance for all the things that I'm going to be doing. But your workflow might be even more intricate. So what you need to do is just take a look at it and see what's going to best suit you and what's going to be best for you in the long run. You don't want to get something that's only going to be good for like 2 years. Get something that's going to future-proof you for a good few years to come, so that way you can make a good investment and have a laptop that's going to be awesome for your workflow for years to come. So with that said, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. If you enjoyed the video, please do give it a thumbs up, as it really helps me out. Comment down below if you have any questions for me, and I'll do my best to guide you in the right direction as to which M1 MacBook Pro is going to be right for you. And most importantly, take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next video.